Normally we have in front of us people we know, basically, Maltese archaeologists who are not strangers to us, and I don't really need to say more than a couple of lines. But today, since I don't suppose anybody really knows Professor Jacuqes personally and about his history, so I'd like to tell you something about him. Professor David Jacuqes is a professorial research fellow at the University of Buckingham. His field of research explores the use of the Stone Age landscape in the Mesolithic and early Neolithic periods. Since 2005, he has been project director of the Blick Mead Archaeological site. In 2013, he was elected a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries in recognition of the importance of the Blick Mead discoveries, about which we're going to hear tonight. In 2010, he won an Open University Teaching Prize for the ways he involved his students in the work of Blick Mead. The Blick Mead Project won the current Archaeology Research Project of the Year, 2018, and in 2023 he was awarded Archaeologist of the Year. Since 2022, the discoveries at Blick Mead have resulted in a pan-European university project funded by the UK's Arts Humanities Research Council to ascertain, among other things, whether the establishment of Stonehenge ritual landscape had its origins in the Mesolithic. This has involved various cutting-edge techniques, for example, in cedar DNA.
Yes.
The Blick Mead team's work has featured in BBC and National Geographic documentaries and has been extensively reported in the media. In the early years of his career, David was awarded a Fulbright teaching scholarship to Florida. In 1998-99, he studied archaeology at Cambridge at Wolfson College, and as a Fulbright alumnus, he has worked to improve the education system of the Republic of Georgia, setting up and running a charity which stimulated an investment of $12 million into the Georgian education system between 2005 and 2008. In 2011, he was chosen as one of two outstanding British Fulbright teaching program alumni of the past 60 years and invited to meet President Barack Obama, no less, during his state visit. The ASM is very happy to have Professor Jacuqes with us in person this evening, and I, for one, am very much looking forward to hearing about Blick Mead. And I'm sure there will be interesting questions to answer at the end, if that's okay with you. Okay, this talk will be recorded. Over to you.
Thank you. What a wonderful, embarrassing and well-deserved. Thank you very much, Tricia. And I am so thrilled to be here, everybody. I wanted to thank Tricia for the invitation and I wanted to thank Naomi actually for enabling that invitation, which is terrific. So I'm very excited. Sorry, I mean to say bonjour as well. So thank you for having me. Right there. And hopefully I've got the right time of day to say that. So would you mind just checking on my progress as I go across these wires?
Yes.
So definitely, a bit of a health and safety warning that. I think I might just stay here in the safety. Okay, everybody. Well, there's a lot to get through to do this justice. So let me just take you straight to, actually, before I do that, let me just allow you to sort of dwell for a minute. This is the Blick Mead site down here, horribly close to the A303, the road that snakes its way right at the top of the picture. You have Stonehenge. So we're about 3 kilometres from Stonehenge, but within the Stonehenge World Heritage Site. So here it is with all of the modern paraphernalia taking out. People in the room will know they're world famous for the Neolithic there and the early Bronze Age, for example, the barrows on King Barrow Ridge. But the Blick Mead site, actually, the discovery of something Mesolithic, significant Mesolithic, in the World Heritage Site was really not foreseen at all. And I just wanted to very briefly go over some of the background to that. So here we have, this is Tim Darville's landmark book, exactly 20 years ago to the year. And so Tim charted all of the finds over various prehistoric periods, and this is the one that covers all of the finds in the World Heritage Site between 9,000 and 4,000 BC. And so there is a record of about 30 artifacts, that's it in total. And of course, this being one of the most researched landscapes in the world, antiquarians and modern archaeology teams, that was enough for Tim to say, as he does here, little can be said about the technological or cultural relationships of the 7th to the 5th millennium BC. So this is a sort of terminus point, classically for the Mesolithic in the UK in the 5th millennium BC. As he says, there's simply not enough of it to judge. Two type of outliers to this, which are always of interest to me. One of them is, so this picture here is taken in the old Stonehenge car park. Can you all see, people at the back as well, can you all see the white discs there? Very incongruously displayed by English Heritage at the time. You would hardly know that they were there or what they were. Well, these denote where these Mesolithic pits or posts were found in the late 1960s. They were found as a prelude to, land being stripped back for that car park. So it's interesting, the radiocarbon date range, as Tim Darville said, sometimes can be interpreted as those, it's so elastic and over supple, really, that radiocarbon date range. You could interpret it that those three posts are contemporary, probably not. More likely, they go in at different time periods. But actually, at the time, they were the only Mesolithic sort of monumenture found in northwestern Europe. So that seemed to me to be odd, that you would have something like this, and albeit on the edge of the Stonehenge knoll, but not really very much else. And also, actually, just under one of the sarcens at Stonehenge, got this cattle bone that was dated later, so right on the overlap between the Neolithic and the Mesolithic. But Tim says here it's indicative of pre-henge activity that is otherwise invisible. So that was it. Now, all well and good antiquarians not finding Mesolithic material, but obviously there are some really good research teams operating, excellent research teams, operating in the later 20th century and the first part of the 21st century. I'll just select one team, the Stonehenge Environs Project, published its account in 1990, and the Environs Project was really good, involved a lot of field working, people very careful, and they didn't find a single Mesolithic artifact. And that really was the final nail in the coffin, as it seemed at the time, for the Mesolithic in the World Heritage Site. Now, so what got me interested? What got me interested in thinking that there might have been something hunter-gatherer-like in the landscape? Well, I'm the sort of person that starts off from a very practical point of view. So I think you want to look at landscapes like this for where the resources are, and a key resource, and you know this on this island better than most, is water. Now, okay, we have a very big river running round the World Heritage Site, or snaking round it, the River Avon. But like most ancient rivers, this would have been fast and wild, muddy to the sides, not the sort of place you'd want to just stop and try and get a drink from. So there's not a lot of evidence for streams, but my eye was drawn by this 1773 map, which pointed out that there seemed to be some water sources here. Now, potentially, I was aware that in the later part of the 18th century, this area, it's called Amesbury Park, was landscaped. And it may well have been that some of these features, if not all of them, were landscaped, but nonetheless, they showed that water was there. And a lot of archaeologists picked this up. Blick Mead is where the red X is. And the assumption had been that that water had sort of been corralled into a certain place by the landscaper, by Charles Bridgman. While I was at Cambridge, I got really interested in doing desktop study, particularly looking at the property records during the landscaping period. And what I found was that actually this rather neat vision of the landscaping it was a bit idealised. And the reality of it is that the people who were living in the big house, the Queensberry family, had no end of trouble getting tenant farmers off their land here in Vespasian's Camp and to the sides. So they never actually had a clean slate for the landscaping. Further, it looked to me as though that this pathway here, which is used by the aristocrats to go out on hunts out into the parklands, that actually was a demarcation line showing what was their property and what wasn't. And so this side of it, I realised that this area was actually owned by Countess Farm, not the aristocrats. Now, subsequently, the aristocrats, well, in time, they took it over. So I was very keen to have a look. All of you in the room, I'm sure, must be thinking, hang on a minute, look, this landscape's been poured over for a couple of centuries. How on earth could it be that this has been missed? Well, there's one very simple reason for it, and one slightly, I think very interesting reason, rather prosaic reason. The simple reason is that the landowners, the family that took over from the Queensberrys in 1820, the Antrobus family, they took a very staunch line against archaeologists and antiquarians. And actually they were dead right to, because aristocrats' memories last longer than most individual memories. That's my experience of dealing with the aristocrats in this area. People talk as though they remember things that were 200 years ago. It's just because it's come through the family. And in this case, people had really remembered very vividly antiquarians taking the tops off barrows, essentially treasure hunting, treasure seeking. So they just said no. They said no to everybody. Charles Darwin wasn't given permission. Pitt Rivers wasn't given permission. Much more recently, Mike Parker Pearson's team, the Stonehenge Riverside Project, wasn't given any permission. So I did something very old-fashioned. I wrote a letter in pen to the aristocrats, and then I also did something very old-fashioned, which was to be patient, because I didn't get a reply for 3 years. And when I did get a reply, he asked me to meet his man, Mike Clark. I'm hoping Gilly is listening in on Zoom, Mike's wife. And I met Mike in 2005. And so I was the first person in our very tiny team to be given permission to dig there. The reason for, I think there's interesting chemistry between Mike and me. He's a very quiet, extremely observant man, had a military background. I'm a type of clumsy and type of loud and effusive, and somehow he read me and he thought I would be the right type of person, and he was very keen, as the Antrobuses were, for the local community to be involved, which was really nice. So this sounds great, doesn't it? Really felt good at the time. There's a bit of a sting in the tail, everybody. We were only given 1 weekend a year to excavate. And so, of course, that means all your grant opportunities dry up. Let me just list the problems. So usually in the British system, just to be straight with everybody, if you've got a research project, you're usually going to be ripping on something that somebody else has done and type of looking at it in a bit of a different way, reinterpreting the data. But in this case, of course, we're looking at something that pretty much everybody thinks isn't there. Secondly, another filter on it is this: the landscaping issue is what's there 18th century. Thirdly, we had the problem-ish with the landowners. So what happened was, I was given £500 a year by my university. That all went on one dig. I think they thought that it would go on like a conference flight. That we'd go up, but I swung it into the archaeology. We really needed the volunteers, you can imagine, with that money. I've got archaeologists doing things for much lower than mates rates and being really good. So, but the thing that kept everybody going was that we realised that this wasn't a landscaping feature. And as you can see from this picture, you've got a constant temperature spring there. And I don't know how clearly the colours are translating at the back, but there's greenery here. It's just the sort of place, again, going back to the practical, the sort of place that animals would have visited. Accessible water, and it has food in it, even in the dead of winter, as in this picture. So that's what kept us going. We were also starting to find Mesolithic material as well. Here's some lovely microliths. But before I don't want to give people the wrong impression here that it was all marvellous. Let me just give you this one example. 2008, our season, remember, a weekend, right? Getting there on Friday, working hours. Our season, we decided we would try and find the edge of the spring on its eastern side, and we dug through all of this chalk, and right at the apex of those poles, we found right at the base, we found a crisp packet. And the crisp packet was a Golden Wonder. I don't know if you have them in. Do you have Golden Wonder crisps? Okay, well, these crisps are a famous crisp product in the UK, and you know the typology is everything in archaeology. I could see it was an old packet, so I sent it off to the manufacturers, and it came back that it was a certain design type between 1968 and 1970. And that was the clue, because this is a legal dumping from the building of the A303, which the landowners, by the way, knew. They knew that they'd allowed the dumping site. It was illegal because it shouldn't have happened, not because they didn't know. So the great frustration. Okay, we're also the first team ever to dig in the spring. And, you know, the archaeologists in the room, well, all of you, I'm sure you can appreciate, you're not going to get very clear horizons or stratigraphy. So it all looked a bit nuts. But I haven't got all the time in the world, so I'm just going to type a fast forward to 2025. Here are the totals. So can you remember 30 artifacts found up to 2006? So the stone artifacts that we've now just in the area of a penalty area in a football pitch, just the penalty area, 150,000 Mesolithic work flipped. Some of our 1x1s, we started off 1x1 metre, that we started off right at the beginning, had 1,000 or so Mesolithic chippings and tools per square metre. It's actually the most in Western Europe. There were a wide range of tool types. We've really benefited from the expertise of Barry Bishop's brilliant lithics expert. And I should have said this at the beginning, but I've just blown off quickly. None of this would be possible without our brilliant specialists, many of whom have done things for next to nothing, or our brilliant volunteers. None of this. So this is a representation of everybody's work, not my work. Animal bones. We found over 2,500, over 400 of those, really pleasing this, identified by Durham University team from the Mesolithic horizon. So this is, first of all, am I rattling away like a horse racing commentator here? Okay, you following what I'm saying. That's good. Let me just explain the horizon. We were very lucky. At some point, we think in the Neolithic, someone put a stone surface across parts of the spring. And that was the dividing line between us working out because everything underneath it is Mesolithic. Stuff that's above it is Neolithic and forwards, as you'll see. So we were confident that we could say there is a Mesolithic horizon, but it was very broad in terms of its dates, as you'll see as well. A lot of the animal bone was found there. All told, I think, close of play yesterday, we've got 41 radiocarbon or OSL dates. Is everybody aware of what OSL is? Some are, some aren't. So what an OSL is, like something from Jonathan Swift, actually. This is where you can extract a date from the last time a piece of mud was exposed to direct sunlight. And it's a brilliant, if it works like it has in our case, it's like a brilliant cross-reference to the radiocarbon dates and also the proxy dating from the tools. So 41 is actually quite a lot. And the date range comes through, remarkably, 8,000 to 4,000 BC. So this is the longest period for a hunter-gatherer site in Europe. Terrific, but I want to crunch down on some of the details. So looking at the animal bones now, so this is the final count as of last year. Durham team, Peter Rowley Conway, Brian E. Rogers and Janet Montgomery. What they're showing is that aurochs comes through first. So this is this super cow, I'll show you a slide next, which gives you an idea of its dimensions compared to domesticated cattle. So it's 53% plus, more likely to be slightly more than that. In fact, actually certain to be more than that because we had some Zooms tests. Zooms is a technique where you can extract DNA out of bone that you can't identify, and nearly all of those examples we looked at were from aurochs. So 53% there, red deer 16, wild pigs 7 to 9%, and then we've got elk and beaver and roe deer, plenty of other things besides as a dog's tooth. We've got small vertebrates, salmon, trout, pike, eel. So there's a real, even a toad that was charred. So it's a real smorgasbord of animals. People are eating lots of things. Now, just going to stop myself or pause myself a bit. Something that's really interesting when you look at that animal listing is actually a way of reading it is that those animals are coming and going at different points of the year. So aurochs, seen by people like Van der Veer as being sort of spring, would be starting to appear in the landscape and being born actually in spring. They're sort of spring to summer animals. Red deer, autumn, winter, wild pig, type of early spring, Lent period, that type of thing as well. So we've got an insight there is that there are economic resources, food resources, potentially all year round. Something else that's interesting is that the presence of elk is normally a marker in the UK of an earlier date, because these are animals that are living in sub-tundra conditions usually. So it may well be that our date range is a bit earlier than 8000 BC. It might be more Star Car-like where there were elks. And then we've got interesting species like beaver. And beaver are also really economically significant. Food-wise, the highest fat content of the lot. Beavers tell 70% fat. Great for people. I had bone marrow in a little place in Valletta last night. I was tempted to take a picture and stick it here, but I haven't got enough time. But that high fat content is really important for people who don't have a lot of, that type of food. We've also got the fact that they've got hides, but critically they dam rivers. Remember what I was saying earlier about the rivers being very untamed. The presence of beavers mean that you're going to have water port in certain places, and that's really great for hunter-gatherers. The fish, they're easy for them to get hold of fish, etc. Lots of things. So beaver's important. Here is the comparison between a domestic cow and aurochs. I thought what might make this real is a photograph taken by Del Derrick. That's an auroch's ankle, an Australopithecus, with an associated flint tool with it. It's really good condition, isn't it? For people in the room who might be rightly thinking, well, have you just found more bits of aurochs because it's the biggest animal, which would be a good thing to think. Just to come back from that the Durham team make the point that we've got all of the skeletal parts of an auroch at the site. So it looks as though, at least in some periods, aurochs are being killed at the site. They're present there. They're not being butchered elsewhere. You can see aurochs are in red on this slide, so you can see that and the dates are on this side on your right. So you can see from the red marks there how aurochs persist in this landscape, their remains persist in the Blick Mead spring from the beginning of the middle Mesolithic, right close to the so-called end of it. You can also see that our earliest dates, this is nice, relate to those posts on the Stonehenge knoll. So it's very likely that the people who are living at Blick Mead were using them, perhaps making them as well, using them in some way. I just wanted to have a quick word about the assemblage. I think perhaps the wrong way to look at this material, I'm very interested to see how this might play out at Latnia. One way of looking at the assemblage is that it's just a dump of rubbish. I don't know, that feels too reductive for me. Another way of looking at it is that it's a sort of record of events. And my God, taking a big creature down like an aurochs would have been some event. It would have involved if we were Mesolithic, it would have involved all of us and the youngest children that we know, children who've got the best eyesight. But we need older people who know how the animals behave and have got all of that experience. What I'm saying is taking down an aurochs would have necessarily involved the whole community. But also, you've got feeding. Rick Scholting at Oxford was saying recently, killing a large bull, you'd have feeding for 300 people. Now, these are not wasteful people, these hunter-gatherers. So there's a strong hint there that these hunts are bringing in other people from further away. And also probably that there's gift exchange operating, that some of that food is being taken down river to other places. So there's some real connections being made here. It's like potentially Blick Mead, like Lourdes, like the Champions League, like politics, like Love Island. You've got everything happening there. It would have been an amazing place for people to be at some points in the year, bringing everyone together. And so therefore, seeing material in the spring as just dumped, I don't think is right. These people didn't have very much, had hardly anything. So their material remains count. And I think placing the stuff in a spring is like a record of events. Killing the animal, all of the little bits of tools, the tools themselves, all of the debris counts. It would be like having a big wedding and putting everything in, all the bric-a-brac in, and as a record. And of course, when people come back, they know where it is. They know where it is. Now, that's a bit creative, but this is fantastic science from the Durham team. So this is only the second time this has been done in the UK. It's isotopic analysis of aurochs tooth. Previous one was done with a much more recent Bronze Age animal, the Earthling Burrow in the Northants. So this was a big punt to get this right, and it's worked perfectly. So what you're looking at here is, everyone, you're looking at an aurochs mandible. And those lines that are being taken out of it, this is where we've got sampling of the tooth. So when cattle produce their teeth, it takes about a year or so for the enamel to form, and that gives the tooth a chance to record what it's been eating, plant-wise, what it's been drinking, and where that liquid has come from. And also, it gives you some sort of signature from the soil. So we've got carbon-13, strontium, and oxygen-18 in play here. And this worked. Remarkably, this works. So look, what you're looking at, it might be one of the best things you see in 2026. So I know, it's not seeing you moving and dancing. But what you've got here is sampling at fortnightly intervals of this particular aurochs, where it moved, what it ate and what it drank. And so the conclusion is, first of all, that the animal stayed on the chalk. It stayed on the same geology. It didn't migrate away too far onto another type of landscape. And that is really important for understanding. As I said, you've got food that it could be as much as 300 meals from one aurochs bull. That's a very stable resource if you know the animals are going to be there, isn't it? So that could potentially enable hunter-gatherers to achieve, as Darren was saying here, large, stable population groupings. And actually in the UK, this has had a real knock-on effect, actually. They're not just this piece of science, but thinking more creatively about hunter-gatherers. The idea being that in some local, best to be as local as possible, in some places, there may have been a decent number of hunter-gatherers around 4000 BC. Actually, at Blick Mead, for people who are really noticing the dates there, there's an intensification towards the end, which is the opposite to what you usually get. So there's more people at the end of the Mesolithic probably than there were in the middle period. So if you have, as I'm putting here, if you have a substantial population, they know the landscape better, they know how to use the technology better, they might actually be an advantage of the newcomers. We don't ever look at it like that, do we? We've just got this stereotype of hunter-gatherers just drifting away and people coming in who have always got superior technology. That probably is the case in a lot of cases, but in some it may not be. And I'm positing, in fact, as the Durham team are as well in this publication. If anybody wants to take a picture, they can access this. This is from the proceedings of the Prehistoric Society. They're saying that in the Stonehenge area anyway, there may well have been a hunter-gatherer population that persisted. I suppose, let me just think of another way of putting this. How many people here have seen the film Dancing with Wolves, the Kevin Costner film? Yeah, about a third of you. Think about that, Dancing with Wolves. You've got that US military wing is about as far out as you can get. Far more Sioux and Dakota there than there are American soldiers. And actually, the American soldiers had to shift, don't they? Rather than the Native American population, because the American soldiers have got the advantage of having guns. I think our understanding of these dynamics is really influenced by the fact that we think about guns against bow and arrows. Actually, it wouldn't be the case in the Neolithic. So we've just got to think about these people who would know more. If they're in areas where there's more of them, something more interesting might happen. Keeping on aurochs, thinking about them, starting to think about them not just economically. So we need to be thinking about the planning involved in large communal hunts. So that near, as I understand it, has got evidence for red deer consumption. Well, it would be a version of an aurochs situation. You would really have to plan, in detail. You'd also have to plan the communal feasting, because there could be all sorts of spin-offs, marriage alliances, which would, in effect, give a link to Blick Mead ancestrally in the future. Ideas and gift exchange, storytelling, myth making. We are starting to get some evidence actually of psychotropic drug taking as well, which is interesting. So I'm mentioning about elderly people, and I'm mentioning about gift exchange. This is marvellous. So this is Mike Clark, the site custodian, in the front of a boat that one of my students, Julian, for his MA, he reconstructed a Mesolithic boat. And Mike, who had Parkinson's and was in his 80s, volunteered to be in the front of the boat. And he went out on the River Avon. Health and safety nightmare, ladies and gentlemen, but bloody fantastic, actually. It was brilliant. And what it did, actually, in all seriousness, for one thing, Mike said, it was a much better thing to be in a wheelchair. That's interesting. More manoeuvrable, and he felt better in himself. He could go further. He had more agency. But secondly, you really need guys like this in hunter-gatherer context. They know where things are. When people are living on the edge, as they are sometimes in the year, these people and what they know is crucial. So it was a reminder, everybody, really nice piece of experimental archaeology, which thankfully went well. So, because there could have been a terrible accident. Where were they living? Well, look, the spring is just over here. Bear in mind platform, I'm coming to that. But we opened up, it's not a gigantic area here. We got a hint that there was something there through geophysics, through the Stonehenge Landscape Project, it's Gaffney's project, and they kindly let us have access to their experts for nothing. What you're looking at actually is the earliest habitation found in Stonehenge World Heritage Sites. So this is a house here, there's a wall, I'll just show you in a bit more detail. So there's a collapsed wall here. We've got some post holes. This short ball is caused by a big oak tree. We got that from the charcoal. A big oak tree falling into the spring. And then it created a type of wall. Can you imagine that? And then you probably got aurochs hides being used as a roof. Really concentrated dates here. 8 dates that really tightly dated this to around 4000 BC, which was fantastic. I felt like a cat rolling in a pool of sunlight when this came through, because that really was special. Think about those dates. Remember, I was mentioning about that bone found under Sarsen 27 on an overlap date between Mesolithic and Neolithic. So we're right in the territory here, the so-called supposed twilight of the Mesolithic, but a lot of activity going on here. Lovely find here, which I was lucky enough to excavate, Sarsen pounding torn, which still had fat on it to a degree. There's earlier use of the site here as well. Over here's a hearth, which dated to around 8000 BC. So it's a lot of activity. But this area is particularly good because you could really tightly date the microliths and the animal bones. For what it's worth, and actually I think what this is a prop for that house. This is the earliest standing stone in the Stonehenge Heritage Site. It is only 60 centimetres high, but just so that you can see you've seen it. Okay, let me just quickly go back a couple of slides here. So I mentioned the platform on your left, which this is the area that goes from the occupation area into the spring. And it was logical, of course, to excavate it. I mean, we didn't have any geophysics at the time, just to see what the relationship between the water and the dry was. And we started to pick up this wonderful surface. Now, Blick Mead is situated in a valley. And of course, the opening idea was that what we were dealing here with was stones slowly rolling down the valley slides. And that's what was causing that effect. But actually, on inspection, and this is a lovely thing about working with our team when you have a lot of volunteers, people were saying, hang on a minute, David, these stones, they're all very similarly sized. And we took a sample away with us, a 2 metre by 2 metre sample, is absolutely right. So they've been sorted. My guess is probably by children. And this terrific platform started to present itself. Now we've got, I should say that identification of it being a laid surface rather than a natural one has been corroborated by a number of people, including Mike Parker Pearson and Professor Tony Brown, who's brilliant archaeologist. So we've got 3 radiocarbon dates on the platform, 2 mid-7th and 1 late 5th millennium BC. And we've also got, I was mentioning about how OSL dates can complement. OSL date also late 5th millennium BC as well. So the impression we've got is that this platform is regularly being reworked. So they're putting this, it's an odd thing. Starcard, people in the room may have heard of Starcard from North Yorkshire, near the North Yorkshire moors. That has wooden platform. Boldnor Cliff in the Isle of Wight has a wooden platform. Wooden platforms make more sense, actually. So why are people picking stone? Well, it may be it's not just practical, it's because it lasts, and it's a monument in effect. It's something that people see as something that's going to be there for a very long time. Interspersed within it, there are a lot of teeth. I think that's interesting, predominantly aurochs teeth, and not exclusive. And this is what's underneath it. And this was absolutely thrilling, to actually find wild aurochs hoof prints perfectly preserved underneath that platform. Remember, of course, we're not dealing in a tidal situation here. So the sieves were crucial, actually, at this point, because if the clear thing was, as you can imagine, if the bits of the platform are in the hoof prints, then the aurochs has gone through the platform. I think this is, in this case, aurochs hoof prints. But if there was not much debris, then it's likely that the prints went in and then the platform went over them. And that indeed, as we expand it out, that's what it looks like. It looks as though the hoof prints are there. There may be some other animal prints too, less clearly defined. And then the platform goes in. So what possibly is happening, everybody here, is that in the earlier phase of the site, aurochs are coming and drinking at the spring. And then there are these feasts and all the rest of it. But at a certain point, and I'm going to be introducing another form of evidence indicates this as well in a second. But at a certain point, there are sufficient numbers of people at Blick Mead hanging around there for longer and longer periods of time. Of course, completely understandably, the aurochs then don't come to Blick Mead, but they are still in the landscape, as we can see from the radiocarbon dates. It may well be that this surface is going in to, if you like, commemorate the presence of them being there, and they may well be totemic by this point, and be rather like relics. So Roly Conway has said this: more and more, Blick Mead stands out as remarkable. What other Mesolithic site was occupied, visited, used for anything like that time period? I can't help wondering about the place almost as an aurochs reserve, where people knew they stood a good chance of running into one of these animals. Well, Peter's brilliant. I can see with Peter's point, but I do think that this extra point, that maybe that is the case for a certain point in the history of the site, a certain point in the biography of the site, but then there is a change. And then it may well be that this is used rather the same way as I've gone to a couple of Maltese churches now. They've all got, and the ones I've seen have all got saints' relics in them. Saints' relics aren't just some side aspect to a church, are they? The church is sort of in effect embodied by the saint. Have I got that right? You know, the saint is sort of part of the foundation of the church. It's a very meaningful act to have somebody's have some of their remains in the church. I'm wondering if it may be similar with aurochs, that you've got the totemic power, the association of an aurochs. Perhaps this platform was associated with qualities of an aurochs, and that may have meant that you had to do all sorts of rituals to get the aurochs on side. Here's some more science. So I'm speculating a little bit and then rowing back with the scientific results. So the Terrace project got involved at the point that we found the hoof prints. Obviously, it's a brilliant thing to find. Then things like that have only ever been found in tidal situations along the coast. So they've come in with analysis of sedimentary DNA, pollen, also any evidence of fungal spores. The technology's improved so much. When our monograph came out in 2018, we got no pollen at all. With the Southampton, Tromsø University, Vienna team being involved, it went completely into full colour, as I'm going to show. Really amazing stuff. So what they, in a nutshell, I haven't got time to go through it all here, but in a nutshell, what they show is that there's a hiatus around 6000 BC, and that's when the woodland around Blick Mead is cleared. Really interestingly, it's also cleared around Durrington Walls. It's also cleared around Woodhenge. So it looks like there's a bigger Mesolithic population with some plan for the landscape in play. So around 5650 BC or so, there's evidence of apple, rose, dogwood. All of those shrubs and those plants, they need direct sunlight. So if you had a big wooded area, they wouldn't exist. Got ivy, elm, and oak woodland on the drier areas further back, willow and horsetail on the wetter ground. Brilliant. It's so fantastic what the Terrace project have done for us. They've basically just taken out time slices. They've dated contexts really tightly. Very fortunately, those contexts are tied in really well with our radiocarbon dates. And they've been able to show how the landscape developed, how the flora of the landscape developed. And of course, that has a knock-on effect on the animals as well. So right at the end of the Mesolithic, look here, and so we've got OSL dates, but these are so close to what we got from the occupation area I mentioned. Grass, willow, alder, horsetail, sedges, self-heel, rock rose, henbane, forget-me-nots, and yellow rattle. A lot of these plants have got medicinal uses, haven't they? A lot of them have that. In fact, some of them are used for good for healing wounds. Some of them are good for the liver. Some of them are good for preventing you from having a cold. So I'm not saying that they're deliberately planted, but all of those things actually are very useful. Look at henbane. People in the room will know henbane is a psychotropic drug. And if we go back to the aurochs, so this slightly revitalizes Guzman's 1983 point about there being a relationship between cattle dung and magic mushrooms. I don't know if you've read that. It's worth having a look at. It's almost as an incentive for hunters to follow aurochs, because where they're doing their business, magic mushrooms grow. They're brilliant for magic mushrooms. So we may well have some drug use going on around Blick Mead as well. We know that at Starkar, it appears that there were shamans. It looks as though from the frontlets that you've got that type of totemic, animistic religion, which is focusing in on a particular animal. So in this case, we're a deer at Starkar. Maybe we've got something going on that's similar at Blick Mead. So this is an etching from Siberia, by the way, but it's a rather nice 18th century etching. So it makes the point. Just thinking about sound, I did think about putting on a bit of house music, because for the drumming part, but I wasn't sure whether you had the facility, so I wrote back on it. But in all seriousness, drumming is really important, isn't it? It can enable a psychotropic experience. That monotonous drum beat, it induces trance states. So I think, we know that there's some drugs, we know that there's going to be some young people there as well. All of these things need to be of course, we're looking through a glass that's, very, very, very dark glass, probably myopically, but it's worth starting to raise the point, the basis of this evidence. So if it is the case, that there's a hiatus around 6000 BC, that people are clearing the woodlands, that does suggest you have a lot of people relatively in the landscape. Where are the aurochs going? Well, we may have got some clues to that as well. And funny enough, this is where the Stonehenge might come in, or at least where Stonehenge is might come. This is something that, for students in the room, I can't recommend this enough. I know your tutors will be telling you it's about to please walk the landscape, but do please just walk the landscape. It doesn't cost anything. And actually, it's a very nice experience, and you can just switch off a bit, but just be focusing on, in this case, this is something I did, thinking about animal movements across the World Heritage Site. So I took myself out for a walk, not close to Stonehenge, but I just picked up, I'd seen it on the OS maps, that you had side valleys here and here, side valleys here and here, and across here. And that there was a natural falling point. This is known as Stonehenge Bottom. It would have been a seasonal stream in the Mesolithic. And it occurred to me that this would be a wonderful place to take an aurochs down, because these side valleys are natural funnels. I don't know if anybody in the room heard of Temple Grandin, the so-called Taoist. Yes. Well, Temple Grandin's idea, she was saying about cattle, with their eyes to the side, being very frightened of being in enclosed spaces, and they're much more likely to run unpredictably. But if you have your hunters in and around it, and if you go to Stonehenge, please don't look into it, look away from it, because there's loads of humps and bumps that are good possible places for people to take an animal down. It's like, I see it as a kill zone, actually, for aurochs and other large herbivores. And it may well be that the Mesolithic pits / posts relate to it, because they are aligned on this side valley, even to the point of the kink, actually, that's in it. They may be just something as simple as time markers for animal movements, and there may be something else too. But if you're up here on the ridge, that would, noticing an animal is close to a wooden post might be a help. I should say to you that as well, that a long time ago, Mike Allen looked at the snail remains in those pits posts, and he argued at that time, so this must be a good 25 years ago, that this landscape, he described it as a mosaic of woodland but cleared spaces. So it's been unusually open for a long time. Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project, so Vince Gaffney's team, they did some major LiDAR work around Kingbarrow Ridge, and they found 2 more Mesolithic post-pits. Look, they're very early, predates, one of them predates Blick Mead. So we've got a couple there, and they're running with the idea that these may be aurochs traps. I'm so sorry, I'm not sorry, but I am apologetic for talking so much and so quickly. And there's a lot of information to process, I know. I'm just going to pause myself a bit here as well. Just think about how organised people have to be making these traps as early as that. So there's something going on in this landscape that's really quite different. Or is it that it's not that different? It's just because people haven't really looked with these types of glass, the right type of glasses. An example of where people didn't look properly and made an assumption, which is a real pity, is that so Blick Mead is over here, Stonehenge is, everybody is this side of the river, but up at Boscombe Down, which is higher land in Amesbury, a post hole was found by, well, I don't need to say who it was found by, it was understandably associated with Neolithic or the Bronze Age. People didn't bother dating it because they thought it was going to be one or the other, and there's so many features from those dates. But because of Blick Mead, the radiocarbon date was obtained from it, and that ends up being around 8,800 BC. So this is on the other side of the river. Also, in the original report, they noted a burial of an aurochs calf, and that was assumed to be Bronze Age. And of course, you had aurochs in the UK until the Iron Age. But the chances are, it was right by the post hole, the chances are it might have been a lot earlier. We, in October 2025, and we're hoping to go back with a lot of support from Amesbury. We're hoping to go back in 2026, this site dry windows. We had an evaluation and we found something really exciting that adds to the pot. The oldest tool, look at it, it's in brilliant condition. The oldest tool that we found so far. So Barry Bishop is saying it looks very, very late Upper Paleolithic, possibly very, very early Mesolithic. He's ballparking it around 10,000 BC. So, I mean, that is, if it's early Mesolithic, it's extremely early Mesolithic. This has come out of the Arts Humanities Research Council funded project, which is basically running with Blick Mead and now saying, how big is it? Is it just about Blick Mead, or are there satellite sites like there are at Starkar, or is there something different there? So this has real potential, as well as the potential Roman villa, by the way, that I was mentioning. Okay, to conclude, one takeaway from the talk tonight is that this area was a special place for hunter-gatherer communities long before monumental stone structures went up, and that the Blick Mead site and the pits show that the landscape was visited repeatedly over millennia. So at that near, you might be right, you might or you might not be right on the cusp of something here. This is from our report in PLOS One. Again, if you want to take a picture of this, you can, really good, these peer-reviewed American journals, you can download them for free. And we conclude the landscape not only had spatio-ecological continuity with the late hunter-gatherer landscape, but in many ways was a development of it. As the maintenance of open areas by herbivore grazing and associated hunter-gatherer activity pre-adapted it. So in other words, the Neolithic didn't just come out of nothing. It came out of something. And that something really had lasted for a very long time, actually. I wouldn't mind just having a quick rant about colonialism here, but I'm worried about the time. I'm going to very quickly say that one of the reasons why I think in my country there's been a problem is that we have tended to associate, even quite recently, the Neolithic with, inverted commas, us. They're farmers, they're doing good engineering things, they're sophisticated, they're putting monuments up that relate sometimes to the sky. And the hunter-gatherers actually are much more like the sort of people that we might have come up against when we were building the empire. And they're them. And that's affected subconsciously, I think, the way that we're looking at them. They're characterized as people who are on the move. There's not many of them, etc. But actually, this is a big body of evidence now to say those stereotypes need to be looked at. Blick Mead summary then. So to finish, radiocarbon dates and the OSL date ranges overlap at the top end with the Stonehenge features and go all the way through to the late 5th millennium BC dates, and the latest of them, the occupation area that we found, overlaps with the evidence for the first farmers, the first Neolithic farmers coming into the area. Large animal, small vertebrate bones survive in the conditions after all. The work and the burnt flint adds to the multi-proxy nature of the site. It's really important, everybody, for understanding the World Heritage Sites, the way it got re-inhabited after the last glaciation period. It's really important for understanding occupation and land use relating to those early features, Mesolithic features. Also, it picks up on the changing nature of the occupation, and it's important for understanding a possible Mesolithic, Neolithic transition. So, Latnia people, over to you. It's worth having this up your sleeve, I think. And this is the most tiny project. Remember, 1 weekend a year. Finally, in terms of what something can do. So I was just saying this to Tricia last night. The Stonehenge tunnel, actually, as of yesterday evening, has been properly cancelled. That's it. It's gone. And the major heritage points. Remember my first slide. In fact, you can see it on the slide just here. How close we are to the road. We went out of our way. We organised a legal representation against the tunnel. The evidence that I very quickly thumbnail sketch for you this evening, that was used in High Court and the Supreme Court. So us guys, people who are interested in archaeology, people who are archaeologists, we really can make a big difference. So save the World Heritage Site, actually, Blick Mead has. And the volunteers who are listening at home on Zoom, I know that there's a few of you, and from different countries as well, which is impressive. And everybody in here, we can make a difference by doing the things that we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
Thank you so much. You're sure there must be a question or two? Question? Well,
yes.
So the transition to the Neolithic and sort of cultural context of that transition,
Yes.
there seems to be sort of some, if I understand correctly, a suggestion that this landscape was in some way also a sacred landscape.
Yes, possible.
Then may have been passed to like the communities as well, because I can see why it would have been from everything you showed us from a Mesolithic perspective, but from a Neolithic perspective, is there a particular that would reinforce that, or is it, is there an argument for that cultural?
Thank you. That's a really good question, and because I can't do it with all the slides, it just enables me to get what I hope is a good answer. You might have noticed a preceding Prehistoric Society journal. So the Durham University team, they looked at a really interesting pit. It's the earliest Neolithic feature in the landscape called the Cone Preanorum. And that's actually intervisible with Blick Mead if you look east. And the Cone Preanorum is a dates to around 3,800 BC. And it's really unusual, actually, because it has 50-50 split between domestic and wild animals, which is unique for any penguin. Also unique as it has fish in it. It also has a beaver's turn as well. And the tools, so where there may be a difference, but where there may be some sort of overlap, there aren't any microliths, which is interesting. But there are bladelets, and the bladelet form, the very late Mesolithic bladelets and the early Neolithic bladelets are pretty much identical. Now that, because of the prevailing view that Neolithic is Venus and the Mesolithic is from Mars, all of that stuff was very much nailed down as being very Neolithic. But because of Blick Mead, that's why Peter Early Conway, John Montgomery and Co got really interested in it. And there, the position they take in that journal article is that actually what the anomaly is about, everybody, is not just someone digging a hole and putting a lot of stuff in it. We've known for a long time that there's major feasting going up on the ridge. So where this ridge is, if you look westwards, you look at the future site of Stonehenge. And if you look eastwards, you're looking across the Vespasian's camp and Blick Mead. So it looks probable that there's a major set of the debris going in the ground, but it looks as though, and the Durham team are positing anyway, that it's a mixture of hunter-gatherers and Neolithic people around that date. So that's a big thing. They're saying that actually the Mesolithic people bring red deer.
It's so much, and what does the genetic look like?
Well, they're very broad brush, the genetics. So if you take the most recent studies, it looks as though there's a wipeout of Mesolithic DNA in the Neolithic. But my argument is, I know Peter feels the same way, is that we're just not being localized enough. It doesn't really make sense, does it, to just have a general picture of something. So you need to look at particular places and then particular biographies and histories, and that makes a difference. But yes, so the DNA doesn't look as though it's counts. Thank you, it's a really good question. Sir, yes.
Excuse me, but where is the nearest site where human Mesolithic bones were found?
Thank you. What an excellent question. The nearest site of thank you as well. So the nearest site of Blick Mead is Cheddar. And we've actually got some tools from Cheddar. So Cheddar's in Somerset, it'd be about 80 miles away and to the southwest. And this, I don't know if you have seen it, so if you check it on the internet tonight, there's been a reconstruction of Cheddar Man done by the Natural History Museum. So he dates to around 7,000 BC, so 9,000 years old. So that skeleton's almost complete. But the interesting thing is there's so few skeletons across Britain and Ireland from the Mesolithic. So the funerary practices seem to be very different. Probably people have been cremated. Yes, please.
Question about the dog or bones.
Yes.
Because I mean, sometimes it is possible to say if they were domesticated or were there, like local wild shit. So
yes.
What was
That's also an excellent question. So it's a dog's tooth, and again, I'm very going to lean heavily on the Durham University team's identifications here. It's definitely a domestic dog. It comes from that Mesolithic horizon, which I said is a bit of a mix mash-up of dates, but it's definitely Mesolithic. Durham and Oxford University tried to do some DNA runs on it. They weren't particularly successful, but I know Peter's view is that dog will look very Alsatian. But you make a really good point. If we can make that more broadly, it's worth remembering that we need far more wolf dogs. So it's actually going to be quite difficult to keep dogs as a subspecies. That might also be a function of breeding. If people are bringing their dogs in for the hunt, that the dogs have a chance to type of, make their genetics stronger, let's say that. So that's a really good question. So definitely, we have wolves as well. Yes, you.
I'm curious about the peatlands.
Yes.
So, where are we getting the from? And secondly, is there anything in the character of the assemblage that indicates kind of site function?
Yes, Scott, this is a dream set of questions. Actually, thank you very much. Yes, crikey, where can I start? So, well, first of all, the stone is largely local, and another type of insight into that is where people are getting material from the platform. However, there are exotics, including really intriguingly slate tool, which has been fashioned in the style of a Russian point. This is a microlith style that's associated with Sussex, a very southerly county. But the slate tool has been subject to petrochemical analysis, and that is a rather broad association. But it looks like it's come from North Wales. So Barry Bishop, who I think you know, Barry is confident that that is a tool, and he thinks it's not very practical, but it looks like someone's trying to. It's basically an east meets west piece of communication at the site. I've mentioned to the gentleman here about the cheddar stone as well, coming from elsewhere. Yes, if you read Barry's Flynn report, you'll see that he's saying that there's all the tool types, which is one of the reasons why we can be confident we have our own bed. So it's not a seasonal site, just used to say butchery. There's a lot of, Barry says, a lot of clothing making going on, high scraping, all sorts of. Yeah, great, yeah, I know.